Hey Cameron, it's Thursday. It's time for our Bible study. It's a little late again. I'm sorry about that. Yesterday, Wednesday, I actually was not feeling well, and I don't want anybody to be nervous. It was not the corona, but sometimes you just get a little under the weather. I think this week with transition, the boys are back in school, and we've kind of been just burning the candle at both ends, getting them up early and getting into school and picking them up. So just that schedule just kind of wearing me a little thin. But I'm okay, and I wanted to have Bible study this week. I got a great email from our friend Morgan Foster yesterday, I think, and she asked if I would be willing to talk about the book of Ruth. And so Morgan, yes, I will. I will be happy, delighted to talk about Ruth. But I want to do that maybe next week and give me a little time to kind of brush up and prepare so that I can be more thorough in my explanation and examination of Ruth. It's an important book, but an interesting book. So I want to talk about that. It's not terribly long. It's only like 4 chapters. But I want to be able to give you, a better informed overview of Ruth. So I will be happy. We may even do 2 parts on it to try to cover it thoroughly. But I want to, so that'll be next week. Next week, Ruth. We start Ruth for Ms. Morgan Foster. So this week, I wanted to talk about. Tim Stewart came by, and I was showing him some of the changes and renovations we've made in the church, and he and I walked into the nursery, and I was just sort of struck by that beautiful mural that Joe and Mary Sue Smith painted in there. And of course, it's the story from John chapter 21, and so it's Jesus and casting your nets on the other side. So I wanted to read that. I think there's an important lesson there for us. So the 21st chapter of John. After these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. And he manifested himself in this way. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. So let's count them up. There's Peter, there's Thomas, there's Nathanael. Nathanael is the youngest. And the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and 2 others. So like 7 of the disciples. And Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will come with you." And they went out and they got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. But when the day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach. Yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus therefore said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish, do you?" And they answered him, "No." And he said, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat. You'll find a catch." And they cast therefore, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. And that disciple therefore, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And so when Simon heard it, that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment. He put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Which I just I'm going to talk more about. I think it's funny. So when they got out upon the land, and they saw a charcoal fire already laid, and fish placed on it, and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have now caught." Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples ventured to question him, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord. And so Jesus came and took the bread and gave them, and the fish likewise. Now, this is now the 3rd time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said, 10 my lambs. He said to him again, Simon, he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, Shepherd my sheep. And he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter said to him the third time, but Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Truly, truly I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk where you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will gird you and bring you to where you do not wish to go. Now he said this signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who also had leaned back on his breast at the supper, and said, Lord, who is the one who betrays you? Peter, therefore, seeing him, said to Jesus, Lord, and what about this man? And Jesus said to him, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. This saying, therefore, went out among the brethren, that disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but only, if I want him to remain until I come, what is that to you? This is the disciple who bears witness to these things, and who wrote these things, and we know that his witness is true. And there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books which were written. And this is the end of John's Gospel. So let's talk about this story. And there's obviously a great deal here and a great deal about when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? That kind of harkens back to Peter's denial of Christ and kind of the parody here of Jesus' restoration of Peter. That after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. So he manifested himself. And it says that this is kind of the third time. So, let's talk about that. They don't recognize him by sight. They don't recognize him by the sound of his voice. It's so when Jesus begins to speak to them in verse 5, Jesus therefore said to them, children, do you have any? You do not have any fish, do you? And they answered him, no. And he said, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find a catch. They cast therefore, and then they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. That disciple, therefore, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, it is the Lord. So they don't recognize Jesus right off by sight. Now, it could be that Jesus just really, his face wasn't really visible. He might have had his robe on, and he might have been wearing like a hood, which was very common, with the hot sun. They wore a lot of hoods. So with his hood up, it's very possible that they just couldn't see his face clearly. I mean, to be honest, we rightly assume, I don't think this is crazy, Jesus probably had a beard. He was a Palestinian Jew. He was, he grew a beard. This was most common among people of his nationality and ethnicity. So, here's a dark-skinned relative. I mean, he looks like they do, if you will. He from a distance from the boat, if he had a hood up, you see a guy who looked like them, who had a beard like them. He could have been anybody. And he doesn't say too much. I mean, he says, children, you do not have any fish, do you? And interesting that he calls them children. And he said, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find a catch. And then John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, which the church has always taught, is the author of this guy. It's John. It's John. There's there's a professor at Asbury who has postulated that the secret disciple and real author of John might have been Lazarus. I don't think that's true, and I think there's no evidence to support it. Lazarus, in the entire Gospels, I don't think Lazarus ever says one word, not one. And though, Jesus is certainly close with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he's not listed as any of the disciples, and he's certainly not listed that Jesus loved him. It's John. The church, I think, knows what he's talking about. There would have been no reason for the church to conceal that Lazarus had written John. Like, it's like some big secret. Like, the church is trying to cover that up. Why? There's no motive for a cover-up. John wrote John. Very easy, and it was largely used and so widely and canonized, and the epistles and the revelation of St. John because of the integrity and veracity of John's testimony. John. Lazarus isn't even mentioned here. So John says, I'll just say that authoritatively, John tells Peter, it's the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that, he put on his, you have these guys put on a robe, and like anybody, they don't want to go home sopping wet. So when they get out in the boat and they're doing their work, it's hot. They take off their outer garments, and they're probably basically in some form of their skivvies, and they're doing their work. But when he hears it's the Lord, and Peter is going to go swim to him, Peter puts on his clothes to go and meet the Lord. And that's an interesting dynamic. It's also interesting that the Lord had referred to them as children, right? We don't see that in the Gospels prior to the resurrection. Jesus had kind of towards the end, he's like, you are my friends. He tells them they've gone from being followers to being students and disciples to being friends, but here he calls them children because he's been elevated. Okay, and this is a lot of questions in Christology as to how the Lord's knowledge and self-awareness and consciousness and his breadth of understanding and knowledge, how did all of that change post-resurrection? And of course, we have some theories, but no one with a theology degree or philosophy degree was on hand to ask him these questions that are now 2,000 years old. The disciples just sort of stood in awe and let him speak. But it seems that Jesus sees himself and the apostles differently, and he calls them children. And it would seem that from this, I think, Peter and the disciples understand the Lord differently post-resurrection. So Peter doesn't want to show up on the beach to see the Lord undressed. And so he jumps in the water with his clothes on. So he's going to end up soaking wet, but he would rather that than show up underdressed, right? So that's an interesting idea. I wear a coat and tie or suit on Sundays, and then I have a robe, of course, when we're in regular church. If the Lord were to come to church, and let's say we knew he was coming on a Sunday, probably I would want to make sure my suit was clean, pressed, shine my shoes. I'd want to make sure that I looked as professional as I could to greet the Lord. And probably we all would. I mean, if we all as a church knew that the Lord was coming to visit us at Cameron, probably we'd be putting on coats and ties or nice dresses that week. We'd want to present ourselves. However, if the Lord showed up and he walked through the door in my best suit, I would get down on my face and worship the Lord. Regardless of the fact that I would be getting my suit wrinkled and dirty, regardless of the fact that I'm scuffing my shoes, I'm going to put my face on the ground and give thanks to the Lord that he would come and visit us in spite of my sin and unworthiness. And I think there's a little bit of that with Peter. I think Peter recognizes that the resurrection makes things different. That the Lord has been elevated, and that the humility that the Lord took on during his earthly ministry, that has been sort of alleviated. And as the resurrected Christ, he is the Lord of all creation in his glory and should be respected and treated as such. So Peter puts on his clothes. I mean, he doesn't have any dress clothes, he just has his normal, but he's not showing up undressed on that beach. He's going to go meet the Lord, and he's going to be dressed. Even if that means he's dressed soaking wet, he's going to do it. And I think that's an act of reverence. I think it's an act of humility, and it's ultimately an act of worship. The other disciples came in the little boat. They were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. Notice that Peter does not ask the Lord, "Let me walk to you," this time. I think this is an act of contrition. There's no storm. So if we wanted to compare this to the time that the Lord walked to them on the water, right? They were at sea, the disciples were at sea, and Jesus walks out to them. There was a terrible storm. Jesus walks on the water. It's the middle of the night. And Peter says, "If it's really you, let me come to you." And Jesus says, "Come on," right? We remember this story. This time, Jesus comes to them. It's a beautiful day. It's a peaceful day, daytime. They're fishing. Yet Peter still gets out of the boat to see the Lord. But he doesn't ask this time, "Let me walk to you." Peter's willing to get in the water to go play homage. And Jesus doesn't have to walk out there to them to prove who he is. They knew good and well. So, of course, they show up, the other disciples show up, and they're dragging the net, and they have 153 large fish. Fills the nets up. And net didn't break. Net didn't break. And they may know it. Although there were so many, the net was not torn. So this is obviously a miraculous thing. It's almost kind of like the burning bush, right? The bush was burning, but it was not consumed. The net was so full of these big fish, and yet the net was not broken, right? So God is giving them this catch. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." And it says none of the disciples ventured to question, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord. And so again, that sort of leaves the question and says, well, none of them questioned. Well, could they not see him? They could. Now they're closer. Did he not look like himself? So, is it his voice? Is it the miracles that Jesus is known to his followers here? It would appear not, pardon the pun, but not by sight. He doesn't necessarily look as he looked previously. Which reminds us of, his appearance to the disciples in the upper room, when he comes in, he says, "Peace be with you," and he holds up his hands to show them the marks of glory. Did he not look like himself? I mean, think of it. I mean, you know, if somebody you knew very, very well, you know, somebody you've been hanging out with for years, as the disciples had been hanging out with Jesus, and you know, you knew that person had died, but then they showed up, you would recognize them. You'd be like, "What? I thought you were dead. I know you. I know you." But that's not how it works with Jesus. For Jesus, he shows them the marks, his marks of glory, the wounds, which do not bleed, but they're not healed. That's an important point here, right? Reminds me of a good joke when we were in seminary. Seminary is wonderful because, you know, once you kind of get past the first year of those introductory courses, and you get to some of the upper level courses, you get to kind of sit around and ask all these kind of weird questions that you've always kind of wondered about. And sometimes the professors, or if they're good, will even in their lectures kind of like answer stuff that you hadn't even thought about asking. And they're like, "Oh, you're going to wonder about this." You're like, "Oh, actually, I hadn't got there yet, but yes, I am interested." And, you know, that's it. But I remember that when we talked about the resurrected Lord, Dr. Wainwright, who he always spoke about the Lord such reverence, and so someone asked, you know, why did the Lord still have the wounds? And I can't recall who, and it doesn't matter. They said, was he still healing? You know, was the Lord still healing from the crucifixion? Is that why he still had the wounds? And Dr. Wainwright looked at that student. He had this wonderful way of loving you and also looking at you as if you were an idiot. And he would say, "The Father, by the power of the Spirit, had healed the Lord, had brought him back from the dead. That's as good as it gets. You don't get more healed than alive again." I mean, you know, no, the marks of glory. These are the Lord's trophies. These are signs of victory. They're not bloody wounds. They're there to demonstrate his authority and victory over death. And so that was, I mean, I'll never forget that. You don't get any better than being alive after being dead. You know, as if the Father had gotten him about 95%, but it was going to take a couple days to get to finish it on off. You know, you know, and of course, once he said that, we all kind of laughed. But you know, it was seemed like a good question to us. But no, the Lord keeps. Dr. Wayne was emphatic about it. The Lord keeps his wounds. They're his marks of glory. So when you get to heaven, the fellow with the holes where they're supposed to be, who's sitting in the throne, and everybody else is worshiping, that's who you'll know is Jesus. They don't seem, though, to recognize him merely by sight. Now, you know, Kate's kind of favorite joke is, maybe he shaved. You know what? Maybe when he got it, he's like, you know, we're going to heaven. Maybe I better trim this up and look good for the Lord, for the Father. And they just didn't recognize him. Who's this guy without a beard? Maybe he didn't have a beard after the resurrection. I don't know. No, I think that there is something beyond that. I think his body had been changed and glorified. Paul says that. That's the changed and glorified. And we're not 100% certain as to the nature or extent of that change. You know, he is made, his body had been made to be enthroned in the kingdom of heaven for all of eternity. What does he look like? They know him, but it takes them a minute. They have to listen. They have to see what he says. They see what he can do. So they don't recognize him right off, but by his words, by his works, they're able to see Christ, or at least recognize Christ. Now that idea is something that I think we should talk about today. This isn't going to be a great long lesson, but where do we find Jesus? How do we recognize the Spirit of Christ? Because like the disciples, we may not see the Palestinian Jew with a beard that we expect to see. We may see Christ in others. So, of course, we hearken back to Matthew 25, where he says, whatever you do unto the least of these, you do also unto me. And whatever you don't do for the least of these, you did not do for me, right? That he's with the poor, that he's with those in need, that when you help those less fortunate, you are helping Christ. Father Tim used to have this great, I think it's pretty famous, but it's kind of a little picture, it's a black and white picture called Christ in the Bread Lines. And it was a picture of the kind of a silhouette of about 5 or 6 people who were downtrodden, looked like they were kind of homeless people waiting in a line for bread, food, some kind, like you might see at a homeless shelter. And dead center in this group of 5 or 6, dead center was the silhouette that was unmistakably what you kind of expect to see. It was Jesus in his robe. He had the hood up, but you could see the beard. It was just silhouettes. It's just black, just silhouettes. But that middle one was undeniably Christ. And I think that picture is called, Christ in the bread lines, or Christ of the bread lines. And of course, the point being that he is there. He is amidst and among those in need. And so as we are called to serve, when we serve, so I'll tell this story. Father Tim, when he was in Aberdeen, he was the priest in Aberdeen. He moved there when I was about 15. And quickly, I sort of was just like drawn. He just kind of drew people to him. Father Tim was just an amazing pastor and an amazing minister. True priest, truly embodied that kind of ministry and love of Jesus. But he and Brother Terry was a Glenmary brother, which is kind of like almost like a monk. Not exactly, but he's a religious person professionally, not a priest. And Brother Terry and Father Tim lived as roommates at the rectory. And so they were all the time working on stuff. And Brother Terry and Father Tim, I think Brother Terry kind of really organized the thing, got this food program up and running for our community. And so the way it worked was once a month, they would go pack these boxes. They were like the size of a book box, if you know what I'm talking about. And they would pack these kind of book boxes with food, staples largely. You'd have a carbohydrate rice and oatmeal or some kind of and to help people. And they gave it out third Friday of the month. So, not just to people who were completely homeless. I mean, although we didn't have too many of those in Aberdeen, but largely those in maybe the working poor, those who were maybe underemployed and needed some help. And Brother Terry headed up and organized that program, but Father Tim was certainly very involved, and he was so charismatic. I mean, Terry just kind of organized and did the paperwork and did the admin stuff, but Tim was always out there, kind of the face of the operation. And they fed, they grew that program to where they were feeding or helping to feed about 450 families a month, because it was one box per family. So invariably, you can't be friends with Father Tim without being pulled into some kind of ministry. And so that's what I'm saying. He's a true priest. So he would, you'd be his buddy and you'd hang out, and then he'd say, "Hey, you are the man. This is guilt-free." He would always say that. This is guilt-free. But you were the man. You are a strong guy, young, you got all that energy. We need a guy who can help us hand out those food boxes on Friday. You think you can do it? And you'd be like, "Me? Yeah, Father, I can do that." So by the time I'm, 17, I am over the good Methodist who hardly ever missed church. I'm over at that Catholic church helping them hand out those food boxes on third Friday of the month. And you had to get up early. You had to get up like 5. And you're knocking this out before school. And and so it was a wonderful thing, because as I got involved, and as my brother would get involved, and then our pastor, like I kind of introduced Father Tim to our pastor, Reverend Cotton, and so our church started getting involved. The Methodists and the Catholics started working together, and that was a pretty big deal, because that Protestant-Catholic divide in the Deep South can sometimes be tough. But Reverend Cotton was really ecumenical, and he and Father Tim became good friends. And so the Methodist Church started, and not like my parents' Sunday school class started, raising money to buy frozen turkeys for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So on like November and December months, or maybe they do it early, maybe they do it like October and November, give people time. But whatever it was, we would have a frozen truck out there full of these turkeys, and from Comer Meatpacking. And they would get each family would get a box, and every box had a frozen turkey to go with it. And it was you saw people crying. Some of these people who were receiving these boxes of food, boy, they get that turkey and they would lose it. They'd hug Father Tim. So my brother and I are up in the truck getting the frozen turkeys out, and Father Tim, because he's kind of the face, he's down there on the ground, coordinating. Here's your box, here's your turkey. He's down there helping people. And I'm 17. And, I have figured out that Father Tim is the real deal. And I'm a little like Peter, this man, Father Tim, by being close to Father Tim, by working with him and being around him, I felt that, if I'm working for Father Tim, I'm working for God. Not that Father Tim was God, please understand, I understood that. But that Father Tim was so committed to the calling and so committed to the church and the ministry that if Father Tim asked you to do something, it wasn't for him. Okay? It was for somebody else, to help somebody else in the service of God. And so, you wanted to be around. He was wonderful, he's funny, he's a great friend. But he's busy. He was always busy. And so if you wanted to be his friend, you would be busy too. You're like, "Hey, Father Tim, you want to hang out?" He'd be like, "Brother, let's hang out." Now listen, you know what a good time to hang out would be? Friday, I got to drive the truck down to pick up a big load of food for the food program. Why don't you come with me? We'll visit all the way to Jackson, and then you can help me unload the food. And you'd be like, "Oh, that sounds great." He was like the Tom Sawyer for the Lord. It was unbelievable. So if you wanted to be his buddy, you were going to invariably be drawn in to helping God. So, it was cold that morning. We're in the back of this frozen truck. And Father Tim, I mean, he was a tough dude. He was a good athlete. He played lacrosse at UMass on a scholarship. He's a tough dude, athletic dude. And he was still, at this point, you know, he's probably in his early 40s. He was still pretty tough. But I'm a little protective of Father. You know, I'm 17, played a lot of sports, pretty active, scouting, and we were kind of tough. And so as I'm watching, you know, handing down turkeys, his father's doing his thing. And this one man came up to Father pretty aggressively. And you had to have a ticket. You went to the line, you got a ticket for your box. And he handed Father his ticket. He said, "Give me my blankety blank box." Cursed at Father asking for his box. And Father he gave the man a box, and he reached around and he hugged that man. Said, "Thank you, brother. Thank you for coming today. God bless you. Do you need some help carrying your box to your car? You look like you're a little tired today." He looked up at me. "Brother Oliver, we're going to need a frozen turkey. We're going to help this brother." He said, "Brother Oliver, I need you to come down here and take over. Just load the cars, one box, one turkey per ticket. I'm going to help this brother get his box and his turkey to his car." So I am coming out of the back of that truck ready to give this dude a right hook, because you don't talk to Father that way. You're not going to come over here. Father Tim is out here helping people, giving away food. This guy comes over here cursing at Father, snatching the box out of his hand. And Father, and I'm mad at the dude. I'm ready to cold cock this punk for talking to Father that way. And then I'm kind of mad at Father, because I'm like, why are you thanking this man for treating you like this? Like, that's not okay. You can't be nice to this guy and carry his stuff after he's talked to you this way. I'm like mad at both of them now. And so Father does. He leaves me there, and I'm loading the boxes and trying to do my best Father Tim impression, which was pretty good, by the way. Best in Aberdeen, my impression of Father Tim. And I'm trying to, hey, how are you, brother? Good to see you. Come on in. Yeah, well, and God, you know, I'm handling it. And Father gets back. And he goes, "Brother Oliver, you're doing a great job. Sorry it took me a while. I had to walk that brother to his car. He was parked around the block, man, on the other side of the post office. It was a hike, but we got him. Thanks for taking." And I'm looking at Father. I'm just dead like, how could you thank this man? This man is cursing at you, Father. How can you thank this man? Father Tim, he just had that old lopsided grin on his face and wearing his old ball cap. We're out there in t-shirts, sweating to death. And he looks at me and he goes, "Oliver, brother, I'm not thanking him for cursing at me. I'm thanking him because whatever you do to the least of these, you do it to Jesus. And that man is giving me the opportunity to serve Jesus Christ. So I'm going to thank him for that. And if I have to walk with him 2 miles instead of 1, if I have to help him, I'm just helping Jesus. I stood there with my mouth open. Because this kind of funny, crazy priest wearing a t-shirt and a ball cap, speaking the words of Scripture to me, I realized in that moment that I was getting a word from the Lord. When I look back on it, you get it together here a minute. That interaction that day changed my whole understanding of who God is and how He works in the world. In that brief interaction, watching Father Tim not live out the narrative of the world, but he was living and breathing the love of Jesus and the care for the poor. And I think that was maybe the first time I'd ever seen Christianity really, really lived out up close and personal in the world. You know, not like it was church and we were singing about it, or not out there in a parking lot, sweating it out, working. I saw Christ. I saw Christ. Father Tim was carrying him that day. And when you see that, when you really see it, you can't quite get enough of it. I think that was a huge moment in my life that kind of stirred in me something about, I want more of this Jesus. I want more of this. So, you know, it had a huge effect. And so I can understand how maybe even when Jesus didn't look like Jesus, the Jesus they had known, when they hear his voice, when they see what he does, they know it's the Lord. Because the Spirit speaks to them and confers that in them. And I think that's the way it was for me. That moment, I stood there with my mouth open, and I could sort of hear the Holy Spirit talking to me. You better pay attention to this, boy. You better see what this is right now, because you're seeing the love of Jesus. And then I had to get back in that truck and hand out the rest of those frozen turkeys. And Father Tim was great. Patted me on the back. Let's hand out these turkeys, Brother Oliver. You're the man. So the question that I want to leave you with this week is, in this difficult time where we're so kind of isolated and away from church, and it can be difficult, how are you able to find Christ? How are you able to see the resurrected Lord in your life? Where do you see him? Where do you see him? If you're watching this video on Facebook, we would, or if you're watching it on YouTube, either way, we would appreciate it if you liked the video and you could subscribe as well. That way you can be updated whenever we upload a new video. But also you could leave a comment. You could leave a comment. I would enjoy reading those. It'd be great to hear from you. You could leave us a comment about where do you see Christ even in this difficult time. Because I think oftentimes that's when he's most visible. When we need him the most, he is most present. But just like the disciples, he may not look like we think he should look. But if we're willing to look not with our eyes, but with our souls, if we're willing to listen for his voice, if we're willing to look for his work and his actions, where are we seeing the resurrected Lord in our life? How is he manifesting himself to us the way that he kind of manifested himself differently in this scripture? So that's a thought for the week. So if you want to give me a call, I'd love to talk with you. Anyway, God bless you. We love you. Have a good week.